Well, this is a Sunday afternoon, and I'm sitting here talking with Grandpa Hunter, and we want to get a little information about some of the things in your life. So I thought maybe we'd ask about where you grew up.
Where did I grow up? Well, I was born in Rigby, Idaho, at home, and I lived in Rigby until I got through the first grade, and then my folks moved to Oregon, Coos Bay, Oregon, and from there I don't know how, we weren't there very long, and they moved to Payette, Idaho, and then to Vail, Oregon, and Vail and Payette are only about 30 miles apart. But then we moved to Vail, Oregon, and there were only two members of the church, two families of the church in Vail when we moved there. And the other family didn't want to be known as Mormons because he was a business in the lumber business, and he said it would be bad for his business if people knew that he was a Mormon. So he didn't want my dad to tell anybody that he was a Mormon. So and we lived in Vail. I must have got through about the third or fourth grade in Vail. And then my dad bought a little farm in Ontario, Oregon. And Ontario is where I did most of my growing up.
So you worked on a farm? You worked on a farm?
It was a small, I think we only had about 40 acres or something like that. And, I did some projects for Future Farmers of America. I did a strawberry project to get a grade in Future Farmers of America. And I grew some real nice strawberries, but I couldn't sell them. Nobody had any money to buy strawberries. I had a hard time almost giving them away. And from Ontario, Oregon, I graduated from high school there. And then I went to Portland, Oregon to take training in sheet metal fabrication. And I worked in a hotel as a bellhop on the midnight shift while I went to school as a sheet metal, to learn sheet metal work. And after I finished that, I took a job in Burbank, California with the airplane. Now I can't say the name of the company. Anyway, they were busy making P-32 aircraft, and that's what I was assigned to work on that aircraft. And I did quite a lot of different jobs on the aircraft, riveting and various kinds of things. And while I was working there, my mom came down to visit with my two sisters, and during the winter, I decided to drive her home in my car, and which we did. And I had we went to through Burley, Idaho, and it was real foggy, a real foggy night. And some kid had just stopped his car right in the middle of the road. And instead of pulling off the road, he just stopped it right in the middle of the road because he couldn't see. And I couldn't see very well either, and so I ran into him. And,
did anybody get hurt?
Well, just cuts and scratches, and my sister Faye got a pretty bad cut, which left a scar, but the rest of it wasn't too bad. And from there I went to Ontario, and because that wreck had ruined my car, I didn't go back to California. I just stayed. And from Ontario, I got a job working at Medford, Oregon, building Camp White, which was a training camp for soldiers. And I worked down there for about a year and a half or so. And then I got a job at Farragut Naval Training Station, which was up on Lake Coeur d'Alene in northern Idaho. And again, we were just building barracks and places for sailors to stay, to live. And I don't know, from there I guess I went back to Ontario, Oregon, and decided to go to school at Brigham Young University.
Cool.
And
about what what years were these things?
Around 1940, 41, 42, somewhere in there. I would have been in Brigham Young University at about 1942. And it looked like at the time that they were drafting a lot of people into the Army. And I decided I didn't want to be drafted, or that I maybe have a better chance of getting into what I wanted to get into if I joined. So I joined the Army Air Force while I was in Brigham Young. And about 6 months later, I was called into active duty, which took me first up to Salt Lake. Well, mostly that's where I was inducted. And then they sent me to New Jersey. Is it Elizabeth City where the boardwalk is in New Jersey?
I think so.
Well, that's where they sent me. And the Army had taken over all of those hotels along the boardwalk.
Oh, okay.
And turned them into barracks for the soldiers. And so we took our basic training on the beach at Jersey City, living in those hotels, big hotels that are along the beach. From there,
what was basic training like?
always just learning how to march and take orders and how to take care of your rifles and your clothes, and mainly how to handle hand grenades and shoot your rifle and clean it, and take it apart and put it back together. And while I was there, the Army started a program that they called the Army Specialized Training Program, which was similar to what the Navy had started a couple of years earlier. The Navy called their program V-12, and the Army Specialized Training Program was similar. And I don't know exactly. I suppose the idea was to get people to join in that, and with the idea of eventually being officer material in the Army. But what they did was send us to various universities, and I was sent to Cornell University, and I was 9 months in Cornell University when they were getting ready to invade Europe, to have D-Day in Europe. And so they needed a lot of bodies in the infantry. And since I hadn't had anything but basic training in the Air Force, and from there on had just been at the university, so they decided everybody who hadn't had any special training would be put into the infantry, and that's where I ended up. So from Cornell University, they sent me to Louisiana, where the 75th Infantry Division was on training out in the boondocks, getting ready to go overseas. And so that's where I went, fresh out of college, fresh in the swamps of Louisiana. And from Louisiana, we went to Breckenridge, Kentucky, and there we trained and for going overseas. And I don't remember how long I was there. Not too long. I mean, probably 6 months. And they sent us to New York, and we embarked for Europe out of out of New York. Landing in I can't say the name of it. Not England, but anyway, it was where we landed. Where they took us was to an old castle area. What's part of on the the little country by England.
England, Scotland,
Wales.
Wales.
Yeah, that's where we landed, was in Wales.
Okay.
Launtwit, Wales. And we stayed in that place for not very long. And then they took us to the boats to go to Europe. And it took us, didn't take us very long to cross the channel, but they weren't ready for us to land when we got across the channel. And they hadn't put enough food because they weren't planning on the soldiers being on the boat for very long, and so we went 3 or 4 days without things to eat until they loaded us off the boat.
I'll bet there was a lot of grumbling and complaining.
Yeah, it wasn't too good. We were pretty hungry by the time we got off of the boat.
You weren't part of the invasion force.
Hmm?
You weren't part of the first guys that went on?
No. Anyway, just about the time we got off the boat was when the Germans started the Battle of the Bulge, started to break through and try to, whatever they were trying to do with the Battle of the Bulge. So they shipped us from France into Belgium by on those old, what they call 40 and 8 train cars that they were used in the First World War.
Okay.
For transporting people. They were actually cattle cars, I guess. But we went from there into Belgium, and then they put us on trucks to take us up to the front line in Belgium. And that was in December of 44 that we got there. In fact, when we got on the front lines, it was the day before Christmas in 1944. And we hadn't had anything to eat for 2 or 3 days again because we were on the move and everything. So they set up a chow line, and just before I got to where they were dishing out the food, they closed the chow line and said we're going into combat. So they took us up to where we were supposed to engage the enemy, and that's where it was. In the meantime, in all of that, why, I had been made the first scout in the first platoon of the Company L, and what the first scout does is goes out and tries to locate where the enemy is, so that the rest of the know where to find the enemy. So on Christmas Eve, that's where I was. They took me out, and they took me to the spot and turned me loose and said, go find the enemy. So that's what I did. And the enemy was supposed to be up a hill some they took me to the bottom of the hill, and where I turned when they turned me loose to go find the enemy. And of course we didn't have any communication like now. I was just out there, and so I thought, well, where's the enemy? It must be up the top of the hill. So that's where I headed.
Were you scared?
Scared to death. But my patriarchal blessing had told me that I would be protected, whether I was on land or on the sea or in the air or under the sea. So I wasn't as scared as I would have been if it hadn't been for that patriarchal blessing. But anyway, that hill was a long, sloping, not steep hill, just sloping hill, and it was mostly pasture land that hadn't been farmed lately anyway. So I walked up through that land, and at the top of the hill was the forest trees, and I figured that's where the Germans would be dug in, was at the edge of the forest. So when I got up close to the edge of the forest, I decided I better not just walk in there straight up. So I decided I'd crawl on my belly up to the edge of the forest, which is what I did. And to crawl on my belly, I had to put my rifle, my M1 rifle, in my arms like this, and then crawl on my belly. And just as I got up to the edge of the forest, the Germans, I guess, saw me and opened fire, and 2 bullets bounced off my helmet, and one hit the wooden guard on the front of my M1 rifle, which was right in front of my chin, and it splintered all of that wood off. But it didn't hurt me. I felt the wood hitting my face, you know. But if the bullet had been a half-inch lower or a half-inch higher, it would have gone right into my chest. And when that happened, well, I thought, well, I better just lay here like it make him think that he actually killed me. So I did. And I don't know how long I just laid there, but along toward morning, I had, of course, had a chance to look around and see where I was, and there were some big trees over to my left that were sort of away from that main line of trees where I had gotten to. So I decided, well, if I ever got the chance, if I was going to move, I would better move over toward those big trees where I'd have a little protection. So sometime in the morning, that's what I did. I jumped up and ran toward those big trees and got behind one of those. And I don't know whether it was in the process of running over there or what it was, but anyway, sometime during that process, there was an 80-millimeter mortar shell fell right at my feet, almost hitting me. And it didn't go off. If it had, they'd have had to pick up pieces. There wouldn't be much left of me. But anyway, by the time when I got over there, it wasn't very long till more of the U.S. troops came up. But it wasn't my company. I didn't recognize anybody. And I couldn't figure out why, because I thought my company was supposed to be following me up the hill. And apparently nobody followed me at all. And when they started coming in, I didn't see anybody that I knew. I couldn't figure that out. And I didn't figure it out until about 40 years later when I was in Orange City and looking on the internet, where I found a little history of our division. And in that, it tells how our company had been first sent out to go up this hill, and then before they got started, presumably before they got started, they changed them and took them to another spot, but it wasn't before my company commander had sent me out all by myself to find the Germans. So my company had been sent somewhere else, and that left me up there all alone. And anyway, during all of Christmas Day, I was up on that hill. We were, and a lot of the soldiers coming up were getting killed, and I was about to run out of ammunition, and I was fortunate to find a sort of a depression, a ditch that I could lay in for cover. And I heard some Germans coming up the hill. It was where I was laying, the hill was fairly steep off to the side there. And I heard these 3 or 4 Germans coming up the hill, talking, and so I didn't know what to do. But I did have one hand grenade left, so when I thought they were close enough, I took the pin out of the hand grenade and tossed it over the side toward where I heard those voices. And I don't know what happened, but I never heard any voices after that. And later that afternoon, I suppose it had been 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, by that time things had pretty much settled down on the hill. Most of the soldiers up there were either wounded or dead. And it looked like I was the only one who was mobile that I could tell. And I knew that if there were any that needed aid, that they weren't getting it. So I thought, well, there was a town. I could see a town down the hill over to to my right, which I hadn't seen before, of course. And I thought, well, if I can get that back down to that town, maybe I can get somebody up here to get them aid. So that's what I did. I went down around and got to that town and found somebody that I thought would go up there and try to give them some aid. But I couldn't find, it took me 3 days to find my unit after that. So that was my Battle of the Bulge.
Well, there's no doubt.
Well, not the end of it, because we went on that hill. A couple of days afterwards, we went on that hill and dug in, and we were up there, and it was in the dead of winter and real cold, and we dug foxholes, and we were in our foxholes for 2 or 3 days sitting on that hill, and the Germans 2 or 3 times tried to break through during the night, and we didn't let them. And when we moved out from there, we moved into a little town not very far away. And it was while we were going through that, well, on the outskirts of that town, that a shell come down, and I hit the ground and laid flat on my face, and the shell exploded, and I could reach over and touch the crater that it blew, the edge of the crater that it blew. And it got a big dent in my helmet, the front of my helmet. And the only other thing that happened was I got a piece of shrapnel in my foot. And so when things quieted down a little, I went back to the first aid station and see if they could take the shrapnel out, and they sent me back to the hospital. And from while I was in the hospital, they debated about 3 days whether they were going to amputate my feet or not, because I had trench foot, and they didn't know whether I could survive it or not, but they finally decided to leave my feet on. And I did get over the trench foot. So I don't remember how long I was in the hospital. I must have been about a month in the hospital. And they sent me back to my unit, which was then on the Maas River in Holland. And our unit was on one side of the Maas River, and the Germans were on the other side. And the night that I got back to my unit, they picked me out as one of the guys. They were sending 6 of us across the Maas River to capture a German to be interrogated. And I happened to be one of the 6 that they picked out to go across the Maas River to go up and capture a German and bring back for interrogation. So we went in a little boat across the Maas River, and the banks of the river were fairly high at that point, and they were strung with a lot of wires and everything. And I don't know what those wires were to set off booby traps, or whether they were to set off flares, or what they were. But all 6 of us got through those wires and strings, and we got up in the German trenches, and we finally found a German soldier, and the guy that was in charge of our group. But I guess he was a young kid, and he wouldn't stop yelling, and they tried to quiet him down, and he wouldn't stop yelling, so they killed him. And by that time, things had flared up all over, so we found our way back to the bank where we left the boat, and we got back down through all those wires again without setting off any problems. I don't know how we ever did it. And got in the boat and got halfway across the river when a whole bunch of Germans lined up on the top of the bank. And I thought sure they'd open fire on us. And the only reason they didn't, I think, must be that we were in the dark part of the river and they didn't see us. So, anyway, we got back across the river. We didn't get our German soldier to interrogate. I guess that's pretty much there. I was in the Battle of the Ardennes Forest and the crossing of the Rhine River. I did both of those before the war was over. And we lost our unit, our platoon. There was only one time there was only about 3 of us survived out of the platoon, and the other. So.
How do you get water to come out of that thing? It wasn't water, but ice coming out.
You gotta push for water, honey.
Dad, it says ice.
Okay, push water.
Dad, it says ice water on one button.
Push it again. It'll show water.
I know, Dad. I put.
Okay.
Daddy, I pressed it. It gave me ice. I pressed the button. It gave me ice.
So when you came back, did you go back to Idaho?
Oregon.
Oregon?
My folks lived in Ontario, Oregon. And I wasn't back very long until I got married. I guess not more than about a month and a half.
What?
Till
I'm trying to get
Elaine
water,
and I were married.
And
Which temple were you married in?
Huh?
Which temple were you married in?
Salt Lake.
Salt Lake? And then, what did you do for work when you got back?
Well, then I went to school at Utah State University, and because Elaine was quite an outdoor girl, so I thought going into forestry would be one of the things where we could do well. So that's what I went. I started majoring in forestry, but 7.5 months later is when Alan was, well, when she took sick from these pregnancy problems, and they took him by cesarean. He only weighed 4 pounds 1 ounce, and she died the day after they took him. So, and I was working with the Forest Service out of Salt Lake City at that time. It was during the summer vacation. And from there, I didn't go back to school because after I lost her, so I went back to Ontario, Oregon, and my brother, Frank, had just started a new business in dry cleaning, a new dry cleaning business, and he needed some help and a little financial, and I had a little money saved. So I went in business with him for a couple of years. Then they called me on my mission, and they called me to the North Central States Mission, which was headquartered in Minneapolis. But they sent me to Winnipeg, Canada for the winter. And then from there, I went to Thief River Falls, Minnesota, and to Grand Forks, North Dakota. And that's where I finished my mission, was in Grand Forks. Well, I had been in Brandon, Manitoba, Canada for a few months prior to going to Thief River Falls.
Did you go to the MTC? Did they have the MTC back then?
Well, they had, it was just a couple of weeks of orientation is what it was. It wasn't actually MTC. But they had a week or two of orientation.
Do you have any special memories from your mission?
Well, a few, but I never had, as far as I'm concerned, I've never had a lot of, I never had contacts like they get now. We taught a few people, but it was not. When I look back on it, it seems like they do so much more now, contacting people and teaching people, so forth. And I remember we went out. Four of us missionaries went out and helped a family do grain harvesting, and another. They were non-members, and my companion and I one time visited a member of the church, and I did a lot of plowing for him on his with his old tractor. We went out. We were told to go out without purse or script for a month out of Winnipeg, and so we did that, and didn't eat very much during that time. But we didn't do too bad either. several times we slept. Well, we slept in hay lofts, and I know one time we couldn't find any place to stay, and so we were by a wheat field and out in the country. And in those days, they used to what we call shock the wheat, which make igloos or teepees out of the wheat bundles. So my companion and I went in that wheat field and made a teepee that we could get underneath. And in the morning we had breakfast in bed because we just took hold of the wheat and shelled it out in our hands and had breakfast in bed.
Who took care of Alan while you were on your mission?
Huh?
Who took care of Alan?
Elaine's parents took care of him until he was 4 years old, which is when I got married to Jenny, and they'd always said when I remarried that they'd give him back, so they did. It was while I was in Grand Forks that I decided that what we really needed was a place. The church needed a place that could call its own, or how were we ever going to get members to, if they didn't have a place to come to and so forth. So I drew up plans for a house chapel, and the idea being that we build a house with a full basement and leave out partitions, a lot of the partitions, and make a chapel out of it. And the basement would be a rec hall. And we had a place for baptism in the basement, baptismal font. And I submitted those plans to my mission president, and he put them to the church, and they approved it. So the mission president came to me and asked me if I'd be in charge of building the building. So I said, oh, I would. He said he'd send me 5 more missionaries who had a little building experience, which he did. And with those 5 missionaries, plus the help that I got from the local members, we built the new building in about 3 months. Well, about 4 months. And I stayed 2 months longer on my mission than I was to finish the building. But I understand they built 5 of those house chapels in that mission before. And then the church came up with the idea of building these small buildings that you keep adding to, and phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So they replaced the house chapel with that. But the idea of the house chapel was, and it worked, was that when we got big enough we needed a bigger chapel, we'd put the petitions in and sell the place as a house, regular house. And that's what they did. And at that time, of course, the local people had to raise 50% of the cost of a building. So what they got from that house chapel was almost came to about 50% of took care of the local people's
for the building
contribution to the new building.
Oh wow.
Which was nice.
So when you finished your mission, where'd you move to?
Where'd I go? Well, that's when I went back to Ontario, and I worked at a guy's farm with him on the farm until Jenny and I got married. And then I went to BYU and finished school at BYU. And while I was at BYU, I worked at the state mental hospital up in out of Provo. I worked the swing shift, so I could go to school and so I could pay for school and pay our way. And from there I went to Ohio State University, where I had a fellowship and got my master's degree.
And that was in what?
Columbus, Ohio.
No, the master's degree in...
Oh, in agriculture. And when I got my master's degree, I had a what they call it, fellowship or whatever, anyway, from North Carolina State University. So I came to Raleigh for my PhD degree. And that's how I got that.
Is that when you started your business?
No. After, when I finished with my PhD, I took a job at Washington State University, Prosser, Washington. Yeah. And I worked for them a couple of years. And then I took a job with Ortho, California Chemical Company, and worked for them a couple of years or so. And then I took then Dr. Phipps from NC State University got a hold of me and wanted me to go out of country with a project that they had with the USAID project. So I took the assignment to Uruguay. So we lived in Uruguay for a little over a year, and then moved to Costa Rica, and were there for about 2 years before I came back to NC State. And it was, I was trying to think when well, I guess it was after I came back it was after that program, AID program, closed down with NC State, that we went in business for ourselves in the so that's about it.
So when did you move to Florida?
Well, I know the year we moved there was 1978.
In January.
Huh?
In January of 1978.
And that was still while I was working for Agro Services, the company that we had formed. So that's...
That's a lot of years.
Huh?
That's a lot of moving.
Yeah.
You've been all over this world.
Been all over.
Well, I really appreciate you spending the time with me and telling me a little bit about what you've done.
Well, thank you.
I've always been interested in it. The first time that I learned about, a little bit about what you've done, and Leslie used to tell me all the places that you guys, that her mom went to growing up and stuff like that. Just fascinated me, because my family history is really cool, but my parents, grandparents, and like that really haven't been anywhere. They're born and raised in northern New York State. They stayed in northern New York State. So this is the most moving I've done, was to go from New York to here. So
yeah, we did a lot of moving.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm going to stop this.